Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This one is titled the League of Doom. And if you haven't seen this show before, what we're doing is we are randomly selecting a card for Magic the Gathering from scryfall.com, making a commander deck around a theme of the chosen card with a budget of $100 or less. So for this week, our random card is actually going to be Nevinyrral's Disc, which is a pretty classic card. 4 mana for the artifact. It enters the battlefield tapped, and you can pay 1 and tap it to destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. So, naturally, if our random card of the week is Nevinyrral's Disc, it's kind of hard to deny making our commander Nevinyrral himself. So we have Nevinyrral Urborg Tyrant as our commander, 3 white, blue, black. Legendary creature zombie wizard for a 3/6. It has hexproof from artifacts, creatures, and enchantments, same stuff that the disc itself destroys. And when it enters the battlefield, we make a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token for each creature that died this turn. So we get a little bit of a payoff for killing our opponent's creatures or our own creatures. And when it dies, we may pay 1, and when we do, we destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. So it does a nice impression of his own disc. And if you notice, looking at this card, the one thing that this doesn't destroy, other than lands, of course, are planeswalkers. So we are going to be building a superfriends deck in the Esper colors. We want to be putting as many planeswalkers on the battlefield as we can, destroying all of our opponent's creatures, artifacts, enchantments, and making sure that we keep our planeswalkers at the end of it to hopefully grind some value out of our opponents. So with that being said, let's take a look at some of our themes. The first one, as I've mentioned, planeswalkers. Gideon of the Trials is a good example of that. It's 1 white for a 3 loyalty planeswalker, and it has a +1 until your next turn, prevent all damage target permanent would deal, so it can kind of protect itself if there's a big threat on the board. 0 until end of turn. Gideon of the Trials becomes a 4/4 human soldier creature with indestructible that's still a planeswalker, and you prevent all damage that would be dealt to him this turn. And the main reason this card is in here, and why I wanted to use it to show off our planeswalkers, is his second 0 ability that says you get an emblem with, as long as you control a Gideon planeswalker, you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. And since we are a white, blue, black deck, we do have quite a few Gideons in here to be able to hopefully not lose the game with. Our next theme, though, is protection. We want to be able to play our planeswalkers and protect them, whether that's making a bunch of tokens, or whether that's by using something like Baird, Steward of Argive, 2 white for a legendary creature human soldier, 2/4 with vigilance. Creatures can't attack you or a planeswalker you control unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. So it is important to note that cards like Ghostly Prison and Propaganda don't actually include planeswalkers. They only say that our opponents have to pay to attack us, not planeswalkers we control. So we do want to be careful of the cards we put in here, and Baird specifically says us or a planeswalker, so he definitely makes the cut. And we have a few other cards that do a very similar thing, but we don't have Ghostly Prison or Propaganda because they don't protect our planeswalkers, they just protect us. And we wanted to make sure that our walkers don't take any hits. And finally, our last theme is going to be proliferating, or putting extra counters on some of our stuff. So Flux Channeler, 2 and a blue for a 2/2 human wizard. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, proliferate. And if we're proliferating, we are putting an extra counter on any number of target permanents and or players. So we can put extra loyalty counters on our planeswalkers. And because planeswalkers are non-creature spells, every time we cast another planeswalker with Flux Channeler on the board, we get to increase the loyalty of all our other planeswalkers. So it just kind of turns into a snowball effect, and we're able to get a ton of loyalty counters really quickly, and hopefully use stuff like Baird and Gideon to protect our board, and use that to value out our opponents and win the game. But with some of the themes out of the way, let's take a look at some key cards, some cards that we really want to get on the battlefield if we can. The first one is going to be the Oath of Teferi. 3 white-blue for a legendary enchantment. When Oath of Teferi enters the battlefield, exile another target permanent you control, and return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Now, that part of it, not super relevant. It could be nice to flicker out a planeswalker, get some loyalty back to it, or use one of our other enchantments to maybe get some extra tokens or something like that. But the real reason this is a key card is that second line of text. You may activate the loyalty abilities of planeswalkers you control twice each turn rather than once. That is super, super important for this deck. Most of our planeswalker abilities either make tokens or they draw cards, and if we're able to get them to ultimate, could potentially win us the game. So being able to activate them twice each turn means that we are going to get to that ultimate significantly faster than we would otherwise. We can draw a bunch more cards, we can make a bunch more tokens, and it's just really going to help us grind out a victory and hopefully get us to the point where there's nothing our opponents can do to stop us. Our second key card is Jeru with Eyes Open, the 3 white legendary creature human warrior, 4/3 with vigilance. And when Jeru enters the battlefield, we may search our library for a planeswalker card, reveal it, put it into our hand. So whatever planeswalker we need for any given situation, Jeru can find for us. And if a source would deal damage to a planeswalker you control, prevent one of that damage. So it doesn't prevent all the damage. But if our opponents are swinging at us with a huge army of little tokens, our planeswalkers can just kind of soak up the damage, not worry about it. And it usually is enough to keep our planeswalkers alive, even if they're getting hit by bigger creatures, because they're not taking nearly as much damage as they should be. So Jeru helps us get the planeswalkers we need, helps protect our planeswalkers. Really can't ask for much more out of a card in this deck. And finally, our last key card is Primeval's Glorious Rebirth. This is an expensive one. It's 5 white-black, so a 7 mana legendary sorcery, which means we can only cast it if we control a legendary creature or planeswalker. But it says return all legendary permanent cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. And that's relevant because planeswalkers are legendary permanents. So if we've gotten pretty far into the game, we've had to maybe discard some planeswalkers, we've had some of our planeswalkers killed, we cast Primeval's Glorious Rebirth, we take all of our planeswalkers from the graveyard and we just put them all back into play. So if we're able to do this with 5, 6, 7 planeswalkers in the graveyard, this is a huge, huge swing in our favor because it's going to be very unlikely our opponents can kill all of them. So we're able to just recur everything that we had, get tons of value out of it, and hopefully at that point it'll be incredibly hard for our opponents to win. But with the key cards out of the way, I do want to take a look at some cool interactions. I do think there's some fun interactions in this deck that wouldn't normally pop up unless you're playing a Super Friends style of deck. And the first one is between Teferi Temporal Archmage and Deep Glow Skate. So we're not in green, and obviously we have our budget limit of $100, so we can't play something like Doubling Season. But we can play Deep Glow Skate, which for 4 and a blue, we get a 3/3 fish. And when it enters the battlefield, we double the number of each kind of counter on any number of target permanents. That does include planeswalkers. And then we have Teferi Temporal Archmage, 4 blue for a 5 loyalty planeswalker. The key here is that it comes in at 5 loyalty, so if we cast him and then Deep Glow Skate, he goes to 10 loyalty, which, luckily enough, is what he ultimates at. And his -10 says we get an emblem that says we can activate loyalty abilities of planeswalkers on any player's turn anytime we could cast an instant. So we go from being able to activate our planeswalkers once a turn to 4 times every single turn. And if we have something like Oath of Teferi, that becomes 2 times on our turn, 2 times on each of our opponent's turns. We're able to activate them a total of 8 times each time we go around the table. So Deep Glow Skate can help with other planeswalkers, but I think Teferi's the big one here, because if we have, it's expensive, but if we have 11 mana sitting up, we are able to just drop Teferi, drop a Deep Glow Skate, and immediately ultimate keeping our opponents from killing Teferi, because he's going to become a pretty big target pretty quickly. He's very powerful. And hopefully being able to get us to the point where we're getting so much value out of our planeswalkers that even if our opponents are attacking them, there probably won't be much they can do. And then our last cool interaction is between Sorin Vengeful Bloodlord, and I put Gideon Blackblade on here, but it honestly could work with any of the Gideons. But Sorin Vengeful Bloodlord is 2 white-black for a 4 loyalty planeswalker, and the key part of this is that its passive ability says that as long as it's our turn, creatures and planeswalkers you control have lifelink. And then Sorin can deal 1 damage to a target player or planeswalker, and then return creatures from our graveyard to the battlefield. Gideon, like all the other Gideons, can become a creature. So Gideon Blackblade passively on our turn is a 4/4 human soldier creature with indestructible that is still a planeswalker, and it can't be dealt damage on our turn. So we are able to use Sorin to give any of our planeswalkers that would become creatures lifelink. This helps us stay alive, helps us get a little bit of extra life, and if we have 2, maybe 3 Gideons on board, we can be gaining up to 8, 12 life a turn, hopefully keeping us out of the range of any of our opponent's things. And now, with our cool interactions done, let's take a quick look at the budget. So the budget for this one came very close to our limit, as you might expect. We're using planeswalkers. They tend to be a little bit more expensive, but we came in at $98.25, which is not too bad, but a lot of that is soaked up by our most expensive card, Teferi, Master of Time, coming in at about $8.51. Now, I've tried to keep this in here because we mentioned earlier with Teferi Temporal Archmage that being able to activate our planeswalkers on everyone's turn is an incredibly powerful ability. This Teferi can just do that on his own. So he lets us draw a card 4 times every time around the table. We could phase out a creature to protect him, and if he's ever able to ultimate, we take 2 extra turns, which with a field full of planeswalkers makes it really hard for us to lose. So he is very powerful. I really wanted to keep him in here to see what he could do, but of course, definitely not necessary. We do have plenty of other planeswalkers that could take his place. So if you're looking to shave off about $8, get the deck below 90, you can cut Teferi Master of Time if necessary. There are definitely some planeswalkers that I had to cut who are cheaper than him. A more recent one would be like the new Dakon Blackblade. So there are options if you're looking to replace him, but I do think he's powerful if you're able to keep him around. And so now, one last thing to do is that we need to see how this deck actually plays. We can talk about it all day long, but until we see how it functions, there's not much we can do. So we're going to jump into a game against Nevinyrral, Emil the Blessed, and Jorn, God of Winter. So Nevinyrral is Shawn's rat tribal deck. I believe he's played it on the channel before, but it gives all his rats fear. He can sacrifice rats to make rat tokens, and generally his goal is to play a bunch of rat colonies, run over his opponents, and try to outpace anyone else at the table. Emil the Blessed is being played by Bilal. As far as I know, this is not Unicorn Tribal. I think it's more of a blinking style deck. So he wants to be able to flicker his creatures, give them +1/+1 counters, enter the battlefield triggers again. And I'm interested to see how it goes. I haven't actually played against an Emil deck before, but it sounds interesting. It sounds very powerful, so we'll have to keep an eye out for that. And then Jorn, God of Winter, is being played by Ezra. This is a legendary snow creature, and whenever he attacks, you untap each snow permanent you control. And this is actually a Sultai deck, because on the back of him is Cauldring the Rime Staff for 1 blue-black. You can play snow permanents from your graveyard this turn. So this is a full-on snow tribal deck. I've talked to Ezra about this one quite a bit, but I haven't actually played against it yet, so we'll see how it goes. He pretty much put everything he could that was snow in the deck itself. There's even a couple of non-snow cards that just fit the theme. So I'm interested to see how that goes. That's another one I really haven't played against Jorn before, so I am excited to test out this deck against some brand new commanders for me. but we will see how it goes. I hope you guys enjoy the game, and I will talk to you once it's done. At the start of the game, Shawn goes first, followed by me, Bilal, and Ezra. On his first turn, Shawn plays a swamp. I play a swamp. Bilal plays a forest. Ezra plays a Rimewood Falls. Shawn plays a swamp and then casts his first rat colony. On my turn, I play a plains and cast Sky Diamond. Bilal plays a plains. Ezra plays a snow-covered island and then casts an Avalanche Caller. Shawn plays a swamp and casts Bontu's Monument, making all his black creatures cost 1 less and draining his opponents for 1 whenever he casts a creature. On my turn, I cast a Commander Sphere, but miss my 3rd land drop. Bilal also misses his 3rd land drop and discards to hand size and passes. Ezra plays a snow-covered island and then casts his commander, Jorn, God of Winter, before attacking me for 1 with Avalanche Caller. Shawn plays a Bojuka Bog, exiling Bilal's graveyard, and then casts Heraldic Banner, naming black to give his black creatures +1/+0, and he follows that up with a Rat Colony, draining everybody for 1, before attacking me for 4 with a Rat Colony. On my turn, I cast Kasmina, Enigmatic Mentor, and activate her -2 ability to draw a card, discard a card, and make a 2/2 wizard token, but unfortunately, this still doesn't let me hit my land drops. On Bilal's turn, he casts a Soul Ring, followed up by Wood Elves, putting a forest from his library into play. Ezra casts a Glacial Revelation, revealing the top 6 cards of his deck and putting all snow permanents from them into hand. This lets him put 4 cards to hand, and then he plays a snow-covered swamp from among them. And he then goes to combat, attacking me for 3 with Jorn, and Bilal for 1 with Avalanche Caller. On the attack, Jorn untaps all of Ezra's snow permanents, and then Bilal and I both take the damage. In his second main phase, he casts a Pilfering Hawk, and then casts a Winter's Rest to permanently tap down one of Shawn's rat colonies. Shawn casts an Underworld Connections on Bojuka Bog, allowing it to tap to draw a card and do 1 damage to himself. He then activates it, before playing a Swamp, and casting a Blood Artist, which drains each opponent for 1, and allows him to drain target opponent for 1 whenever a creature dies. On my turn, I activate Kasmina, drawing a card and discarding a card and making a 2/2 wizard. I then cast a Charcoal Diamond. Bilal casts a Farhaven Elf, putting a land into play from his library. Ezra plays a snow-covered island, and then casts a Bergstrider, tapping one of Shawn's rat colonies. He then attacks me for 1, Bilal for 1, and Shawn for 3, untapping all his snow permanents on the attack. In his second main phase, he casts a Priest of the Haunted Edge and an Icehide Troll. Shawn activates Underworld Connections to draw a card, plays a Cabal Stronghold, and then casts his commander, Marrowgnawer, draining each opponent for 1. He then casts another Rat Colony, draining everyone for 1 more. On my turn, I play a Swamp, and then cast an Oath of Kaya, doing 3 damage to Ezra's Pilfering Hawk and gaining 3 life. And then I cast an Oath of Gideon, making 2 1/1 core ally creature tokens, and making it so my planeswalkers enter with an additional loyalty counter. Bilal casts a Mirari's Wake, giving his creatures +1/+1 and letting his lands tap for double the mana. Ezra activates his Icehide Troll, giving it +2/+0 and indestructible until end of turn. He then casts a Frostwalla and attacks me for 8 and Bilal for 3, untapping his snow permanents when he attacks. I decide to block his 2 attackers with my core allies, taking 0, and then in his second main phase he casts a Draugr Necromancer, exiling his opponent's creatures when they die, and letting him cast them with snow mana. Shawn activates Underworld Connections to draw a card, and then casts a Rat Colony, draining his opponents for 1, activates Nevinyrral, sacrificing his permanently tapped Rat Colony to make 4 Rat tokens and do 1 damage to Ezra with Blood Artist, and then attacks Bilal and I for 9 each, which is unblockable due to Fear from Nevinyrral. On my turn, I cast a Teferi Temporal Archmage, activating his -1 ability to untap 4 permanents, and then I cast a Jace the Living Guild Pact, and activate his +1 ability to look at the top 2 cards of my deck and put 1 into the graveyard. Bilal casts a Luminant Primordial, targeting Priest of the Haunted Edge, Nevinyrral, and a Wizard token to exile them, and each player gains life equal to the power of their creature exiled. In response, Ezra sacrifices his Priest to kill the Blood Artist and do 1 damage to Bilal. Then on his turn, he casts a Centaur Omen Reader, and at this point we realize that we forgot about Draugr Necromancer's ability to exile creatures when they die, so Shawn casts a Defile to retroactively kill the Draugr Necromancer so that everything is still the same as it was. And Ezra then moves to combat, attacking me with his Frostwalla, activating its ability to make it a 4/4, and Jorn, and then he also attacks Shawn for 8. This lets him untap all his snow permanents as well. On Shawn's turn, he plays a Witch's Cottage to put Blood Artist back on top of his deck, and then casts a Bolas's Citadel, allowing him to cast spells from the top of his deck by paying life instead of mana. And then he plays 2 life to recast Blood Artist, draining everyone for 1, activates Underworld Connections to draw a card, pays another 2 life for a Rat Colony, draining everyone for 1, and he then pays another 2 life to play another Rat Colony, draining everyone for 1 again, pays 2 life for a Piper of the Swarm, draining everyone for 1, and then moves to combat. He attacks me for 11 damage with Menace, knocking me out of the game. On Bilal's turn, he plays a Stirring Wildwood and casts his commander, Emil the Blessed. Ezra casts Villainous Wealth for 2, targeting Shawn. This has him exiling the top 2 cards of his deck and letting Ezra cast either of them if they're 2 mana value or less. Unfortunately for Ezra though, they're both lands. Ezra then attacks Shawn for 19, activating the Frostwalla and the Icehide Troll, and untapping all of his snow permanents thanks to Jorn. On Shawn's turn, he activates Underworld Connections to draw a card, before recasting his commander Nevinyrral, draining everybody for 1. He then casts a Damnable Pact to draw 1 card, and then pays 2 life to cast a Throne of the God Pharaoh. This allows him to attack both Ezra and Bilal for enough damage thanks to the Fear from Nevinyrral that they either die on attacks or die at the end of his turn thanks to the Throne, winning Shawn the game. Alright, so we didn't quite get to do some of the stuff we wanted to with this game. Nevinyrral's disc never quite showed up. We did have it in our hand right at the very end before we died, but didn't get the chance to play it. Unfortunately, Shawn's rats just got way too powerful way too quickly, and with our protection and our tokens that kept dying, there really wasn't much we could do to try to stay alive, unfortunately. The lack of lands also really hurt us. I think if we had hit our land drops earlier, we probably could have put up more of a fight, but I do think that Shawn's deck showed a lot of power in this one. Ezra's deck showed itself to be very powerful too, and I think if he had had a couple more turns, he probably could have eked out a victory or done something to slow Shawn down. Bilal's deck seemed very powerful, but he too, just like us, stuck on lands, so unfortunate for some of us, but that's how it goes sometimes. But I hope you guys did enjoy the game. If you have any suggestions for future games, let me know, or future decks, let me know. I would love to build around some cards that people are interested in. We've done that before as well. If you're interested, we did that on Imminent Doom. It was a fun deck, but definitely a little bit jankier, so I love doing that kind of stuff. If you have suggestions, please do let me know. Also, feel free to follow me over on Twitter. That's where I post all of the updates and try to keep people up to date on everything that's going on with the decks and with the new videos. Other than that, please like and subscribe if you're interested in more, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.